Hey everyone, Reed here with Big Strong Book, and today we're going to be talking about Kairos by Jenny Erpenbeck. This novel, which was published in 2021 in German and then translated into English in 2023 by Michael Hoffman, just last week won the 2024 International Booker Prize. That was how I heard about this book, that is why I purchased it, and that is why I read it, and we'll review it here. So, as I had mentioned in my review of 100 Years of Solitude, and I may have mentioned it as well in By Night in Chile, but I've just had more of a desire recently to try to really dive into international literature, albeit, of course, reading it in translation, not in the original languages. That is one of the follies of being a Native American of my age, and especially my schooling. I didn't have great chance to become fluent in many languages from a young age. Something I hope to amend with time. But Kairos, again, the way that the International Booker Prize works is like a lot of literary prizes, they of course release a long list, which is then cut down to a short list, and then the winner comes from the short list. But the Booker Prize, going even wider, is of course one of the most storied literary prizes in the English language world. For many, many, many decades, the Booker Prize was awarded to a work of fiction in English that was published in one of the Commonwealth countries. So the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, there might India, I think maybe. I'm not sure exactly all of the countries that were included in that, but I think in 2015 or 2016, they decided to expand to include works published in the United States. That was met, of course, with a lot of controversy, thinking it diluted the prize. However, in response to that, they also reintroduced International Booker Prize. So a work that was originally written in a language foreign to English and then translated into English. So the award kind of is dual. It is awarded to both the original author, Jenny Erpenbeck in this case, and the translator, so Michael Hoffman. So both of them were given this award. And I kind of was on the early wave of people who bought the book before it, of course, sold out on, big online marketplaces, because whenever something wins one of these awards, whether it be an author who wins the Nobel Prize or a book that wins the Pulitzer or the Booker Prize in this case, they'll sell out quick because everybody who, if they haven't heard of it already, they really want to read it. So Jenny Erpenbeck is a German author. You can get it from the vibe from the back of this book with kind of the critical, praises and testimonies, but also just generally searching a little bit online. Jenny Erpenbeck, it seems, for a little while has been kind of a bookmaker's favorite for a future Nobel Prize winner. So I went into this with a lot of great anticipation, and it's intriguing because it's a German novel set in primarily set in the late 80s, early 90s, during, of course, the fall of the Eastern Bloc, the fall of communism, and it is set primarily in East Berlin. So we have these characters who are experiencing this life-altering geopolitical series of events and having to adapt to it. And I have to admit, right off the bat, that this novel, it started out great. I really dug the prose style. It was a little bit out there, a little ethereal, but I dug it. I dug kind of the intriguing nature. I mean, of course, there are many works of literature out there that have classic young adult female student has an affair with a middle-aged man. Like, that is kind of a tired trope, but it's like, okay, what is Erpenbeck going to do with this trope? But then I'm like, okay, I think I know where this is going. The relationship is obviously an allegory for the general fall of communism. That this relationship, which is a man who is part of the older generation of thinkers, and this young woman who is the up and coming generation, going to clash too much. It will ultimately fail. Kind of like with the fall of communism, you had the old guard, you had, of course, tying it to Russia, to Moscow, you had Gorbachev and Perestroika and Glasnost and all of those more kind of neoliberal reforms of the 80s that ultimately precipitated into the fall of communism. So it was obvious where the story was going to go, and I was okay with that. That's not a bad thing. Again, I think I mentioned, I'll just spoil right now, not a spoiler for the book necessarily, but I'll just say I did not ultimately like this book one bit. And I did at first, and that's what is very intriguing, is this book got off to a great start. The first 50, 100, this book is about 300 pages. So for the first third, I was really into it. I was digging it. I'm like, okay, I like where this is going. And I knew, obviously, this had allusions to, it had ties to the fall of communism. And I was curious to see what other ideas it would start to explore. I don't think there was much else. It was kind of, this story was propped up on this idea, this theme, this opportunity for thematic exploration. But it was just that one idea. At least that's what I got from it. There might be something that I'm missing. That's always the case. There could be something that literally got lost in translation. When I went on Goodreads, I was just curious after I had finished this to see, and there were a fair amount of 5 out of 5s, 4 out of 5s. I think the average for this book on Goodreads was 3.5 out of 5, which isn't necessarily surprising for a work of literature like this, especially work of international literature. But it seems like, and granted, this may be inaccurate, it's just that what came up on the first few pages, so the top liked reviews, a lot of 4 out of 5 and 5 out of 5, and a lot of them were, the reviews themselves were written in German. There were a lot of people who read this book before it got translated, it seems. So maybe they read in the original German, maybe they were able to get something out of it. Maybe this book, for not only for somebody who read it in German, but for somebody who is German, perhaps somebody who lived through this era, this might resonate with them more than somebody like me, somebody who does not speak German, who read this book in translation. There might be something fundamental that is lost because I obviously was not alive growing up in the era of the fall of the Soviet Union, the fall of communism in Europe. But great literature can transcend whether or not you were alive during a certain era. You should still be able to connect with it. That's the point of literature. It's not exclusive to readership from one era to enjoy it or not. But this is, so I think getting into the book. So as I mentioned, it is the story of a fraught, long-running, and what turns into borderline abusive and controlling relationship of Katerina, who is a theater student, and Hans, who is kind of this radio program director in East Berlin. And again, part of, I think, it starts out strong. You've seen something like this many, many times before in literature. And I am not one to criticize a book often on its length. It's kind of like that scene in Amadeus where Mozart gets done premiering one of his new operas, and the emperor talks to him, and he's like, I don't know how I felt about it. And he's trying to think of something to criticize and critique, and he says, there were too many notes. Just cut a few notes out, and it'll be fine. And then, of course, Mozart said, well, which notes did you have in mind, Your Majesty? And of course, Emperor Joseph cannot answer that. However, I think that critique applies very heavily to this. Obviously, it is not that long of a book. It is not even 300 pages. But this book again, because it cycles that theme of the fall of communism. It's commentary, but it's just reading it. It felt like it was saying the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over and over again for 300 pages. Had it dove into a new theme, had it tied into where I thought this might be going, I'm like, okay, we're spending so much time just thinking about the fall of communism. I was wondering, will it go into talking about or ultimately being a commentary not on Germany from 40 years ago, but will it ultimately become a commentary on modern day Germany, present day Germany? That would be so very interesting. And I didn't know if it was going to go for the last 100 pages, the back half. I honestly thought the first half would be the relationship of Katharina and Hans. In the late 80s, early 90s, the fall of communism. And then we would jump ahead, even though it makes it clear in the prologue that Katharina and Hans, they haven't been together for quite a long time. Spoiler alert, in the prologue, it begins with Hans' death. But I wondered if then it would jump ahead to the 2010s, the 2020s, probably the 2010s, just when this book was written and published. But where it would jump ahead almost 30 years, and we could maybe see these characters as they are, but also be a commentary on contemporary Germany. Who knows? Maybe this works. Maybe this works as a commentary on contemporary Germany. Maybe it shows that just like the characters in this book are still reeling from the effects of Nazism, and then by extension the effect of communism bisecting Germany, but then maybe it's that the commentary is that Germany has never really gotten out of the shadow of Nazism or the shadow of the GDR, the shadow of the Eastern Bloc. Who knows? It's just, it keeps cycling it again and again and again, over and over and over. Hans and Katharina, they'll start to fall apart and they'll get back together, and they'll start to fall apart and they get back together. And then it gets into a point where it's clearly cycling. You know, obviously Hans in this role representing kind of that older German generation who had come of age during World War II and they were entranced, they were intoxicated by communism, or perhaps maybe not intoxicated by it, but they tricked themselves into thinking that it was the right way. But ultimately it was never, it was a straw man propped up on a bundle of sticks, and it was never going to hold. And then you have the younger generation, and perhaps the younger generation feels the regret of the current era. That might be the case. If this book if it was shorter, if it was more succinct, if it had more of an opportunity to shift the lens more directly, again, because of course this may have been implied, it may have been clearly written in the subtext, but I just don't think that would have been the case in something like what this book turned out to be. Had it been shorter, it kept it. I think not only would it have gotten its point across in a more concise way, but also a better way. I think concise is what this book needed to be. Again, maybe the point is the repetition, and I can understand repetition as the narrative device, as the crux of the story, but when repetition is really the only thing this book has in it, when it comes down to it, when you're kind of limping towards the finish line of this book, I don't think that that's when it works. Because the repetition at a point, it was probably around the halfway point of the book for me, honestly, that's when it really starts to become a detriment to one's enjoyment and one's view towards this book. Because for a while during this book, I was willing to give it the benefit of the doubt, but I don't think I cannot give it the benefit of the doubt any longer, knowing that it just kind of, it has a good horse. There's a very good thoroughbred horse of an idea here in this book. But then the horse is beaten to death, and it's beaten, 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 and then it just ends. That was my difficulty with this. It's a shame because this book got out to a great start. I would consider this book, quite honestly, a 1-star, maybe at most a 2-star read. And it started out as a 4-star. 4-star that was like inching towards a 5-star. That's how it started. It really hit the ground running, but then it decided to run a marathon when it didn't do the training for it. That's what it feels like. Maybe that's too harsh of a criticism. I don't know. Maybe I missed the point of this. I don't know. Maybe if I read it in German, or if I grew up in kind of Central Western Europe or Eastern Europe, I would have felt different about this. I don't know, and I don't think that should matter. You should be able to enjoy it regardless of where you grew up, of what language you read it in. And because this won the award, it shows and that the translator, that Michael Hoffman, because of his strength of translating, this has its moments, but the moments get lost by its repetition. So I can't recommend Kairos. I can't recommend it. In some ways, I'm glad I read it because I really haven't read any contemporary German literature, so I'm glad that this at least exposes me to it, and it helps me know that I have no desire to read anything else by Jenny Erpenbeck. I mean, really, this was the worst impression that somebody can get from an author reading for them the first time. I know there are a lot of people out there that love her novel, Go, Went, Gone. So maybe that would have been a better starting place, but I honestly foresee the only way I would read another work by Jenny Erpenbeck is if she someday in the future wins the Nobel Prize. Then I might try to give her work another chance, because if she is honored in that way, if that community thinks that she is deserving of that award, great for her. It's a shame. It's a shame that I feel this way. I don't often feel this way about books where I just have such a visceral dislike for them, but I do. I'm not going to hide that. I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say, oh, blah, blah, blah. Oh, no, it was great because it was a great look at, the fall of communism in Germany and what German life was like, and the allegory and the ideas and the themes, when it was just one theme. It was one idea that got beaten to death. And that a book that does that in such a way where it turns the reader off from it isn't good. It's not good, and it's not something, again, that I will revisit. I cannot recommend Kairos, but I'm very curious to see what you all have to say about it out there. I'm very curious in that, because obviously this book will be exposed to a new audience by virtue of its Booker Prize win. So that's, again, I'm glad I've gotten exposed more to contemporary German literature, when in fact I wish this book actually reached into contemporary Germany a little bit. I can't recommend this book, but I am curious to see, for any of you out there who have read Kairos, what you think. So let me know in the comments below, and I will see you guys next time.